Welcome, everybody. And yes, Darius and I are here. We're part of a larger team, but today we'll be presenting a little bit about a 3-year research project we just come out of. In fact, we finished it in February of this year. And by the end of this presentation, we'll also be sharing where we're going to next. But as an idea of what we're doing today, we're going to be looking at the research objectives, the project premise, mid-year project outcomes, the final phase and the summary of the end of project findings, and where we're going to next and what we're currently involved in. So I'm just going to hand over to Darius. And Darius, if you want to give us a bit of a positioning here about how this research all came to be.
Yeah, thanks, Lewes. As Linda mentioned, I'm from the professional association, the Mathematics Teachers of New South Wales. And by nature of who we are, we have members across the state, all across New South Wales. And what we were talking about for a long period of time is how do we support all of our members, irrespective of where they're teaching, whether they're in-field or out-of-field teachers. And so by a chance meeting that Lewes and I had, we got talking about what he was doing, what we're doing as an association, and we got our heads together and said, well, we really want to do something about supporting those teachers. We know there's teacher shortages. We know that there's out-of-field teachers in there for different reasons, but how can we support those current practicing teachers now? And so what we came up with after a long discussion was this. It was looking at what are those factors that we need to consider that develop a teacher's identity to keep them in the profession, but how a professional association actually supports them as well. And a professional association is a form of a community of practice as well. And so this was the research question that we actually came up with. And we were capturing in our target area, regional, rural and remote, we were capturing out-of-field teachers in this particular research as well. Lewes?
Yeah, so it's nice that you think it was by chance there, Darius. We had I think it's always had my research had a look at opportunities, and when we were chatting, obviously great ideas were coming forth. So this is obviously the direction we come into. One of the things which I wanted to share here was that even though we were looking initially at the Moree and surrounding areas for the research focus, COVID hit us, and we started in the beginning of 2020. And before we knew it, the SERP application, which was to do research in New South Wales education schools, it took 20 weeks to get through. So before we knew it, we were in the long haul through COVID. So a little bit of what we did at the beginning here gave us actually a bit of time to do some conceptualization as well. And part of that was this model here. So Darius, I'll just get it started, then I'll hand over to you for the professional association component of it. But what we conceived of it here was that the teacher, may they be out-of-field or in-field mathematics teachers, that's what we were focusing in on, they were the center of a community of practice. We, the larger research team, as you can see there in the publication list there, on the right-hand side, we conceived of this community of practice not only being the teacher and teachers in the school and across schools, but also the leadership within that school as well. We saw it being integral to the ways in which those teachers will be supported in that community of practice. We also identified the need for the local system context, which eventually started us reaching out to regional mathematics coordinators and the like. Darius, I'm going to pick up from there and over to the association.
Yeah, sure. One thing that we were really clear on at the start, and some of the initial work that we had done at the start, was there are other communities of practice models out there. And some of them were really, really successful. And there was one that we came across, which was for head teachers of mathematics. And it was a really successful community of practice, but it was funded. And when that funding dried up, the community of practice actually fell apart because the funding was set up there for people in particular roles to really drive it. And so what we were really adamant at the start of this was we wanted to come up with a model and a support mechanism that was independent of funding. And that's the role that the professional association plays. So we're a maths association, so we're really looking at supporting teachers of mathematics. Our association's been around for 150 years, and we have no doubt it will be around for at least another 150 years. And so what we're trying to do is look at what is the role, the function, the mechanisms that us as a professional association needed to implement and support that was independent of funding for these teachers to get their support. Did I capture that enough, Lewes?
Absolutely. And there's three underpinning concepts we had. It had to be sustainable, it had to be replicatable, and it had to be translatable as well. They were the three things which we were trying to make sure we were putting in place in the Moree area. But as was mentioned already, COVID came through, and we actually weren't able to get access into those schools for quite some time. But what we did, we spent some time there surveying all the members of MANSWA. And part of what we were looking at was ways in which we could measure this mathematics teacher identity. Now, we do know about the Hanna-Timms scale and various other scales out there. But what we're also looking at here is ways in which we could look at self-efficacy, belonging. Obviously, belonging is an important part of identity. And we come up with these 5 questions in 3 sets here. And they are if you look at the publication here, but they ended up being a very good measure of these components of identity. We realise that these are identity measures. There are, of course, additional members' identity parts to a larger scale, which we may be developing, but these ones here were part of the mid-project outcomes. And we call this the Tommy scale. And we actually use this, and you'll see it coming up again later in the project as we get there. And we also looked at, during that time when we're starting to figure out how we're going to get into these schools, around how can we actually heighten the intention of teachers to participate in such a community. One of the ways we looked at that was through a theory of planned behaviour, looking at ways in which we could look at their attitude towards becoming a member of the community, what were some of the subjective norms, how they approached being a member of a community based upon what others might be thinking of them or the other support of them, and also their perception of behavioural control, how much control they feel they had to actually become a member of a community. We looked at these through online and also face-to-face modes as well, and what we found was that attitude towards behaviour was by far the greatest predictor of intention to participate, followed by perception of behavioural control, and then subjective norms. Now, if you want to read more into the paper, I've got it listed there at the bottom. However, we also looked at school level. We broke it into primary and secondary, and also in years of teaching, and the age, the gender, the school location by regional or metropolitan or rural or remote, and what we call fieldedness, out of field or in field. And what we found was that school level, it was a negative predictor, such that the primary school teachers were more likely to want to intend to participate in the community of practice for teachers of mathematics. And by the way, the sample size here was over 600 members of MANSWA. And obviously there's a bit of a critique there that members of MANSWA could already be interested in participating. And that's one of the things we've noticed in the paper as well. Not significant differences at all, and nor was the fieldedness. So out of field and in field, there was no difference between them and their intention to participate. Overall, on the 7-point scale, it was a little bit over 5 was the intention to participate overall there. So by doing this bit of a study here, we were looking at ways in which we could, like I said before, enhance that. And it did account for this over the right-hand side, account about 5% of the variance. On the other side, was over 50% of the variance was accounted for by theory of planned behaviour. We're still trying to find a home for that paper, but hopefully very soon. So, Darius, you want to talk to this next slide?
Yeah. One of the things, if you remember back, we want to help practicing teachers. And so what we did was we went out very quickly, very early on in here, and actually asked them what they needed, what support they actually needed, as being a teacher in those particular areas, and what were their barriers for support, because we had particular ideas. There was some literature out there that had particular ideas, but we thought, let's look at the cohort that we're dealing with and ask them those questions. And so what we end up coming out of this, do you want to just pull up all these bits here, Lewis? So people can have a look as we're talking through here. Because all this information came out of those surveying of teachers. And they reinforced some of those ideas that we had, but then others that we hadn't actually thought about. And so one of the things, if we go down to the bottom there, is looking at the barriers. And what was coming out really, really quickly were these elements in the barriers. And it wasn't necessarily funding to participate, because these teachers working in these schools said, we've got the money to be able to participate and do these things, but all these other barriers came into play that were, I suppose they're greater barriers than what the finances were. So that was something that was really interesting that we had. We always get that lack of time, and everyone would have heard that. We've got lack of time to be doing this and that. The scheduling issues, finding casual teachers, because we're in the midst of COVID there as well. And being in regional, rural, remote schools, it was that the internet, the consistency of access to that online space. And like Lewes said, COVID hit us. So we really had to pivot from a face-to-face model and face-to-face interactions into that online space as well. But interestingly, all the teachers that we asked, you can see, wanted to collaborate with other teachers and recognize that that was something very beneficial for them. They all wanted resources, and they wanted quality resources, or they wanted to be led to what were quality resources. They were happy to share, and they wanted to hear from those experts as well. The next one there, the next 2 points there in the useful features, observing other teachers and being observed by teachers. We know from the literature they are great mechanisms to put in place for schools, but the teachers were hesitant to do those. Lewes, did you want to mention anything else?
No, and that was probably one of the most surprising things to me. But I also feel that on the left-hand side where it says member readiness, and the orange one we got there, while there were, remember we were talking about regional remote teachers, while some had actually indicated they'd been involved in face-to-face communities before, it wasn't that many, just in that 7-point scale, just over 4. It was significantly higher than those online. So what I'm suspecting here, is obviously we need to do a bit of research on it, is that these teachers here had not had experience being observed by other teachers or observing other teachers, particularly those who are mathematics qualified or specialists. And therefore, maybe that was sort of playing into their hesitancy there. But that's just me having a bit of a think about that. But and I suppose the only other thing there to mention there is that the resources to participate online were significantly higher. And I think that really comes down to the distance and time for travel and getting release from these schools, because they're also telling us that if they wanted to go to a day-long in-service training, they'd have to leave the day before, travel, get there in the evening, spend the day, and then travel the day afterwards. So it was quite an investment of time for face-to-face as well. Anything else you wanted to spot there, Darius?
No, I'm excited for the next slide. What was one of the outcomes, Lewes, that we had? Well, because it's always good to go through these things, but actually have an outcome afterwards. So what we ended up coming up with was a purpose-built online platform for any member of MANSWA. So for a maths association, or anyone that's actually had an interaction with MANSWA. And we went through a big research days, a lot of design in here, but there's some critical key elements to this particular page here. So there's 4 buttons across the top there, and that's community, a search function, a discussion, and an upload or a share button as well. And what was coming out with the work that we've already mentioned, Venga and their communities of practice and things like that, is these are the elements of how people participate in communities. And in our particular case, teachers of mathematics communities. And so they wanted to feel part of or join particular communities. And one of the questions that we actually asked the participants here was, what communities do you want? And we came up with a massive list of communities, which we pushed around and shoved around. And what we actually found out in general terms is we don't want too many communities. Too many is too much. You start to silo yourself far too much. And so we came out with a couple of different communities. And what we were was, there's an all members community where everyone is able to participate and see what's going on and share resources. But then we split it into primary teachers, we split it into secondary teachers, and then senior secondary teachers. So that real critical end of high school that schools really look at. And those communities seem to be working and functioning and interacting really well in those broad ways. Since then, as this year has actually gone on, we've actually created some other specific communities depending on what's actually going on at the particular time. And what we've actually done since this project is those communities have been developed based on an event or a professional learning or some sort of event. In the case of New South Wales, we have new syllabuses being rolled out at the moment. And we actually run a new syllabus course. And so we've actually created a new syllabus community in there because there's a high need for resource sharing and discussion very specific in that, rather than, what am I saying, like mass communication with everyone. Whereas those people who are focusing on those particular syllabuses, they can narrow that down a little bit. The other roles there, or these other buttons, are actually aligned to roles of people's participation in community. So some people just want to go there, put a search word in there, keyword search, and just take out information and just take. Other people want to have a discussion, and some contribute to discussions, some start those discussions. And the other role in a community of practice is I want to share. So here is a digital artifact or resource that I want to share within my community as well. And so that's how those 4 buttons actually came about. They reflect the roles that people take on within a community, irrespective of the life cycle of that community or where those people are actually positioned in that community. Lewes, did I miss anything in there?
No, I think very comprehensive. And part of the benefits of this website is it does actually allow for Boolean search terms, so people can really get into the fine grain of what they're after in that side as well. This little thing I've just brought up there is just talks more into what Darius was mentioning there. We did initially start off with Marie and surrounding areas. That's on the left-hand side here, this group of people. But it transitioned into many communities, and we're looking for ways in which they can be connected. And Darius also mentioned about the life cycle. So we're looking at the work of Wenger, but we're also looking at other people as well, like Gongler, who are looking at ways in which maybe not life cycle where it has a certain ending, but a transformative cycle, where as the community develops, it starts to transform and potentially has the ability to break away and also to feed back into the system of education. So that's just something which we're looking at there as well. And at the end of the project, this is in 2022, we're finally able to get into schools and to make things really work well. So we had a flurry of end of project data collection, where we were looking at how the members of Manswa who participated in this in the surveys did a pre and a post, and we're trying to figure out, even in that short amount of time, we're looking at Maths Community, which was that website, the community website, and we're also just looking at have attended at least one Maths event since 2020. And what we found was that while you see the asterisk there, very short amount of time, these are trends for people involved in that Maths community, but for the people who actually had attended at least one Maths event since 2020, which is when COVID had actually hit, what we found is a significant increase in their Tommy scores, their sense of belonging, their sense of self-efficacy, and their sense of enthusiasm for teaching mathematics. What we also found was that their professional isolation was decreasing. We found their intentions to quit as teachers also was decreasing. And we found that the satisfaction as mathematics teachers also was increasing just in this short amount of time. And again, as I said, this is trend data. Nothing actually rose as significance here for the people involved in the maths community, but for those who had also done at least one measure event, they were all significant. Well, we also, looking away from this, but just looking at the actual the factors here, what we found was that Tommy, which is self-efficacy and also sense of belonging and self-efficacy and enthusiasm, as that went up, the intention to quit went down during this time here. And that was a significant predictor. However, when we looked at satisfaction, it was actually a mediator. So while as Tommy went up, satisfaction was going up, what we actually found was that satisfaction was the main contributor to intention to quit, such that satisfaction increasing as a mathematics teacher was actually leading to intention to quit decreasing. Okay, so that's some of the outcomes, and obviously we'll be in the middle of writing up some articles based on all that data there, and which actually brings us now to the end of the project. So Darius, you want to talk into that, and then I'll talk into the last bit very quickly. I
know I'm watching at the time, Linda, so don't worry. I'm looking at that time. So at the end of the project, we showed you the platform that we have. We had significant interest from our sister associations across Australia as well. And so one of the things that we've actually done is the Mathematical Association of Victoria have actually come on board in our particular site as well, and they've enrolled their teachers, and they're rolling it out and doing an education program through them, through their membership as well, because they conducted some independent studies themselves and research themselves and found what we had actually, the outcome that we'd come up with was a good alignment to what they were trying to achieve and support mechanisms for them. And there's obviously plans, and there's certainly interest to roll it out to all the states and territories across Australia as well. So we have that one big maths community for teachers across the country. And the second outcome of it, Lewes, is?
We've just recently been awarded a micro-credential grant from the Australian Government Department of Education to run a pilot in higher education, as you can see there, which is professional certificate in teaching mathematics for out-of-field teachers. It's basically a 0.25 ETSL, and we're right in the middle of designing that right now. With even most recent thing we've done so far is the learning outcomes for it, and next is into the assessment. We're going to be mapping it all, and the idea is we'll actually have this micro-credential ready for launch February next year, and it'll be actually give the opportunity those students who finish this micro-credential to also then get advanced standing into the graduate diploma of professional learning. And we've got 3 streams there at Southern Cross University. So that's a pretty exciting outcome. And that's coming again in partnership with MANSFA, and looks like Australian Association of Mathematics Teachers as well. They're coming on board.